Thank you all for joining us for our continuing Resource Network webinar series. As always, we're excited to be bringing the webinar series to our members and invited guests. All of the presenters speaking in the series throughout the year have made a commitment to provide our membership with actionable insight into areas that can help them grow or otherwise impact their bottom line in a positive way. While webinars like this are the start, they will always be providing more granular content when they visit our peer groups. Before I introduce our two speakers, I should go ahead and answer the most popular question we received during these webinars. Yes, we are recording this. We will send you an email after the webinar with a copy of the slides and a link to the MSP-Ignite YouTube channel where you will be able to watch the presentation again. You will all remain muted during the presentation. However, please use the Q&A button to ask questions along the way. Our keynote speaker today is Pete Busam. Pete is the founder and owner of Equilibrium Consulting, a marketing consulting firm specializing in assisting technology companies. He has more than 30 years of experience in the channel in a variety of roles. His thought-provoking insights on the channel have been published by numerous industry-leading trade publications, including CRN, Channel Pro, Channel Futures, and Channel Insider. An industry thought leader, he has given presentations and participated in panel discussions and numerous channel events over the years. He has also provided commentary on the industry for the Philadelphia Business Journal, Entrepreneur, and the Wall Street Journal. He's fully committed to all of the communities he immerses himself in. Pete is an active member of CompTIA, the Sales Association Sales Leader Council, Forbes Coaches Council, and the American Legion. He's also a United States Navy veteran. Pete, I want to thank you for your service to both the country and our members. Of course, webinars like this do not take place without the assistance of our valued partners and sponsors. Today, we have the pleasure of being sponsored by Rocket Cyber, and we're fortunate to have President and co-founder of Rocket Cyber, Billy Austin, with us. Good afternoon, Billy.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the webinar today. Today, we're presenting our SOC as a service. For those of you that are not familiar with the acronym SOC, that stands for Security Operations Center, which is all based on the premise of continuously monitoring to be able to identify threat actors and indicators, specifically for the small medium business infrastructure, if you will. Just to set the presence, a little bit about our backgrounds. This is my partner, Carl Banzoff. We've been together for almost 2.5 decades now. We've been developing security products, originally with Citadel Security, that was primarily focused on vulnerability remediation for the Department of Defense and intelligence community, which later on became McAfee. We rejoined in 2012 to develop a data breach risk intelligence solution, primarily for the HIPAA and PCI communities, which is now from SolarWinds, which we got exposed and learned quite a bit about the MSP community in and of itself. So we look to take our enterprise and government and security backgrounds and really wanted to focus in on a specific opportunity. When we decided to start Rocket Cyber, one thing that we did is perform a lot of investigation. And one thing that we found is just an overwhelming volume of small business were continuously being breached, intrusions, regardless of the numbers that you see from the various media outlets, if you will. We've always said it's not about the percentage. It's the real question is who hasn't been breached. And when we step back for a second, is anytime you see an epidemic, there's always an opportunity. And we looked at the MSP as a channel to exploit this opportunity and take advantage of this whole dilemma on the daunting volume of intrusions. And when you look at these 5 bullets here, they were really kind of what evolved into our reason for why we decided to start Rocket Cyber and eventually evolve into a full-blown SOC as a service company. Historically, these small business owners were convinced that firewalls and AVs were good enough. A lot of the times the perception is evading these defenses are how the bad guys gain access to the network, which in fact is partially a true statement. But I would also like to shed light that we have what's called the threat gap. And the threat gap is really what's unknown, where we have no visibility or no insight. And I'll shed light on that here in a moment. The deciding factor is what we call the dwell time. And the dwell time is when an attacker gains access to a network, but they go unnoticed for a long period of time. You know, I think most of us have read the news on Home Depots and Targets. And, you know, in fact, if you take a look at, let's say Marriott, for an example, you know, most of those dwell times were like 3 and 4 years. Just think about that for a second. You have attackers inside your network for 4 years and you don't know about it. What could they possibly be doing? And if you think about it, they're really setting up a coin-operated business to be able to establish a foothold inside that infrastructure, create persistence on some type of, you know, computing device to be able to exfiltrate and proliferate something of monetary value, which in most cases are personal identifiable data or intellectual property. What I'm trying to depict here in the graph of green to red is the longer this dwell time remains an issue is the greater the financial impact. So one of our objectives with the SOC as a service is when the inevitable does occur, and I'm referring to an intrusion, how can we bring that 206 days down to months, weeks, days, hours, and minutes, and eventually seconds, so we can be able to respond and deter those attackers. So to be able to set the premise of, you know, some of the presentation content here is I want to talk about threat indicators. And one of the reasons that we expose our backgrounds and our development experience on, you know, a variety of different security products over the tenure of our careers is not just our backgrounds, but many security vendors. When you look at this radar, let's focus at the very bottom. Let's start with hash values and IP addresses and domain names, those bottom three. Almost every MSP provides some type of prevention, detection, blocking capability to be able to detect bad hashes or IP addresses or domain names. And those have really become, you know, kind of what I call commoditized. I mean, it's almost a core necessity to be able to have that capability. But as we move across the radar, things get a little bit tougher. And so when you look at this fourth bullet, it's called endpoint, network, and cloud artifacts. You know, I would say over the past couple of years, you know, many small businesses, they begin migrating to what we call next gen, you know, malware prevention, which is going to give you that endpoint artifact telemetry. But the real question is, are we monitoring those endpoint, you know, the way we should be? Are we monitoring for any type of defense evasion or antivirus evasion? Are we also monitoring the network telemetry or the cloud artifacts? And I've got a few examples to be able to see if you can answer yes to those. Tools, this has been a real challenge for all security vendors. And I think we're all familiar with things like password crackers and things like Mimikatz. You know, historically, vendors created a static signature that said, this is Mimikatz.executable. We detect it and we said there's a presence. The problem is the bad guys are now have access to the source code. They compile it, create their own nomenclature for it. So it's a cat and mouse game with all the vendors. So therefore it's becoming it has become very hard for security vendors to be able to tackle the tool approach. The hardest thing for security vendors, and the majority of most vendors do not provide what we call TTP detection. This stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. And just to shed you a little light here, tactics stands for the first T. Think about that is the goal of the attacker. So if I'm a bad guy and I want to gain access to the network, I want to be able to gain initial access. I want to establish persistence on that box. And I perhaps want to establish a command and control server so I can exfiltrate data. Those would be sample tactics. Those would be the little bullets that I've listed here on the right. The technique would be the actual technical operation that I'm going to perform in order to obtain any of those tactical goals. So for those of you that are ex-military, we use this phrase TTPs, you know, in the world of warfare, if you will. So it's a somewhat very common strategy. To be able to put this into perspective, throughout our daily lives here at Rocket Cyber SOC, once again, the Security Operations Center, we observe countless intrusions and compromises throughout the day. And what I'm trying to depict here in solid green are two examples of what we call endpoint indicators, endpoint threat indicators. In this case, had exactly evaded what we call next-gen malware prevention. You've seen, you know, we're showing a VB script that would eventually call a PowerShell script, a web.ini file that contained a list of command and control servers. That's what the C2 stands for. And what we found that was very interesting is that web.ini file would simply make callbacks and continuously update new command and control list. The second thing is it would use what we call LOL binaries, or living off the LAN. Those are utilities that are already present in the native operating system. One of those is what's called bits. So, you know, it's things that are already existing. It's not just predominant to Windows. It could be existing in Mac or Windows. But nevertheless, these are just two examples of a long multi-stage attack campaign that we've seen. And what we found is we identified this bad stuff, but we didn't have visibility that said, how did it start? So what we decided to do is, why don't we expand our telemetry to start monitoring all the potential attack vectors besides, you know, beyond and above the endpoint. So we said, well, the majority of this stuff happens by email. So why don't we begin with Office 365, given that all the small businesses are very heavily favored, you know, with that email system. And when you look at what we call initial access, now keep in mind this initial access is one of those tactical goals of the TTPs we were talking about. One example that we see very common is what we call stolen credentials. Another example here could be what we call brute force into the Office 365 account for those accounts that may not have multi-factor authentication enabled. Stolen credentials are popular from those Marriotts and Home Depots, those very widely data breaches where all that data resides on the dark net. The bad guys buy it, you know, get a copy of it, and they start authenticating into all these customer environments. And to be honest with you, once they get access to the Office 365, the game's pretty much over, because they're going to move to stage 2, which is what we call lateral movement. Most of us are familiar with the concept of spear phishing, but there's a specific attack ID called internal spear phishing, and it's going to be very likely high probability of success, because now I'm a trusted user. You're going to be able to open up that spreadsheet from that trusted user. That's going to eventually evolve into downloading scripts, or if you've got an Excel file with macros enabled. There's so many trillions of examples, but from a high level, you're looking at cloud telemetry in the gray bars, endpoint telemetry on the green. And then what we found is the majority of the default firewalls are not blocking or have any type of rule to detect the exfiltration of data leveraging the bits protocol. And so therefore we said, you know what, we have to be able to create a cybersecurity practice that is monitoring for all these moving parts, not just the endpoint, but being able to bring in that cloud and network telemetry to be able to put together the storyboard on how this originated and be able to stop it before it gets to that exfiltration stage. At the end of the day, almost each and every one of these attacks that we observe throughout the day, I always say it's inevitable. I'm not saying it's okay, there's an intrusion taking place, but think about it like this. Every attack has multiple stages, and we're given the MSP or the SOC operator the capability to detect one of those stages at an earlier cycle before it gets way down in the dwell time, like 6 months, for an example. So that way you can be able to deter, detect, and take action before the attacker accomplishes their goal, which is, we all know, is typically to be able to steal something of monetary value. Just to paint the picture, when we look at cloud telemetry, for an example, so I'm in Dallas, Texas. I see a normal successful authentication at the very bottom. However, I start seeing a failed brute force activity from Brazil, which maybe not too concerning, but if I see it, 50 different times within 60 minutes, probably want to take action, as I know that somebody is definitely trying to beat away at my Office 365 account. And then something else more alarming is, given the fact I'm at Dallas on the same timestamp, I also see somebody else successfully authenticated in Russia to my account. And the problem that I'm trying to illuminate here is, most of us as MSPs or SOC operators, are we visualizing how this stuff is originating? And what we're finding and observing throughout the throughout a number of incidents is it's occurring through Office 365. It's not to state that all of them, but it's definitely a majority of them. As we move forward past the cloud telemetry, let's bring in the network and the endpoint together. In many cases, I talk to MSPs throughout the day. They say, Billy, we don't permit RDP connections for our customer networks. And I hear that quite often. And I will tell you that if the user has the capability to download software, then it's very probable that an RDP connection could be spun up. We see users that download software that will open up an RDP connection without any type of intelligence or insight to the MSP until they happen to be monitoring for it. When you start looking into the details and you tie that network to the host, we can see that somebody is now running a curl script from the command line that's communicating to command and control servers. And there's so many different examples. I'm just given the time a lot just to provide a few eye candy. Summing this thing back up, I wanted to look at the evolution of the MSP space and understanding and speaking with probably 50 some odd MSPs at the start of the gate. Hey, we started with break fix, we moved into basic AV, started getting into firewalls, and the evolution of MSPs has really become almost as a MSSP if you look at the classification of what Gartner and Forrester and most of those industry analysts. And so today it's all about how can Rocket Cyber, and us as a company in conjunction with the MSP be able to come together to deliver that 7x24 SOC service to be able to tackle on those 31 million small business organizations that need this continuous monitoring service. And with that said, that's what really led us to the development of what we call a threat monitoring platform. That is, it's multi-tenancy, integrates with RMM and PSA tools, really developed it specifically for the MSP industry. It's very unique because we've also developed a series of what we call purpose-built threat detection apps. And we include that in our own app store so we can be able to identify suspicious and malicious activity. And we said, you know what, if we're going to hone in and focus on the small business market, we really have to, be very cost sensitive because we know that the MSP space has to make a profit, and eventually the SMB owner has to be able to absorb the cost. So there's really two different models. We have a software component that, you know, you can come in and get everything at $1. But the real question is, do you have the security talent in order to be able to monitor and act upon those threats? And if not, we decided to create a full-blown managed SOC that basically is, you know, where we're an extension to your team. You can leverage our backgrounds and experience to be able to triage those events and to be able to automate those threats into your PSA ticketing system. From a high level, sure appreciate your time today. This is going to conclude the talk from Rocket Cyber. Thank you.
Okay, I just got unmuted. Well, thank you, Billy. Those were some really good hot buttons to talk about on cybersecurity. Hopefully I can make the same hot buttons on some marketing tips and tricks today during our time. So my name is Pete Busam, and I'm from Equilibrium Consulting, as Steve had mentioned earlier. Today I want to talk to you about just some basic trips and things along the way. Across the top you'll see the think, plan, implement, and optimize. And so we want you to think about that as we go through today's presentation and discussion. So in the think phase, you know, a lot of the managed service providers or technical service providers, you know, we all know what our core offering is. We talk about it all the time. But one of the things that we've really got to do is get down and start documenting what it really is and what it isn't, right? And so everybody in your organization should be speaking the same thing. And a lot of times technical speaks a little bit different than sales might speak than finance, because finance has to bundle it and take the costs and then put it out as an invoice. So there's a lot of pieces that you have to put in what we would call your core offering playbook, and that makes it a repeatable process and consistent across your piece. Another thing that you need to think about as you prepare in this road to start marketing, and I say these things in the think phase, are things that you really need to do as a foundational building block before you move into getting in and diving head deep and just start marketing. Because you need to know what your offering is, but you also need to know, who do you market it to? So I always tell everybody, take a drill. You know, do a drill in a house and look at your existing client base of who you sold to. And is there an area that you've done really well where, you know, you've got 3, 4, 5 customers and you didn't even realize that you did that industry very well. If you do that industry very well and you have that, that's a great market for you to continue to look at, to corner and leapfrog and get some low-flying fruit, right? To market to, because you'll probably have success because you speak the language and have the experience. And if you know your product, you'll do very well. The other piece is your brand presentation memorable? So do people recognize your logo? Is there something about it? Is, you know, more than anything is, as you're marketing, you need to be seen and be heard. So it's not necessarily about one component of marketing. You know, one of the biggest things that I always talk about is expectation. Do you have the right expectation of, as you engage in a marketing endeavor, whether it's internal or outsourced, to understand that you're building something and you're getting on a railroad track, as I say, and you just keep stoking the engine and adding marketing pieces of, you know, SEO and email and web and webinars, and all of these different components all add up. But you need to think it through, so you tie it through, and you need to make your brand memorable. You need to be seen and be heard in everything that you're doing, right? So consistency across your brand, everything that you're doing, right down to business cards or mouse pads or whatever it is that you leave behind to have recognition on your brand. And you know, the biggest thing is who will be managing and measuring? Let's face it, you know, a lot of us are owner-led in our businesses today. And as we're owner-led, we get pulled in many different directions. And it's very hard for an owner to be in tech fighting the fire drill and managing the finances and looking at sales and marketing. So we recommend, if you've got somebody that's got some bandwidth, to manage that, to run reports, to look at the things that are important for you in marketing and moving your brand forward. That can be an administrative assistant, that could be somebody that's doing general management, it could even be somebody in the accounting department that's got a little bit of bandwidth, especially if you're working with somebody on the outside in an outsourced model. Okay, so we move over to plan, and you know, planning is very, you know, we don't succeed by chance, we succeed because we plan, right? So we have to get from point A to point B. And you can kind of see in this graphic, sometimes you can shortcut and get straight to the end point. Other times you got to put a lot of work in moving through that maze. And there's a lot of times where you hit a brick wall that you have to back yourself and come back around and redo it. But the first thing I tell you in your planning stage is define your goal and metrics. Now, at the end of this presentation, I am going to put up a slide that's got a couple things, and there's a multiple page like executive summary that gives you some ideas and a template that can get you started. Some ideas of things that you might want to measure, components of your plan that might be in the plan, you know, whether it's email, webinars, press, website, SEO, you know, the list goes on and on. Vendor engagement, nurturing your existing clients, employee advocacy of having people work in your plan, right? But you have to start with goals and metrics, and you know, that's how most businesses succeed, is what's the goal, they look at it, and then they strive to do it, and they measure against what that goal is to make sure they get it. And if you meet that goal, then redefine it, up it, give yourself a stretch goal, but go ahead and do that. The other thing that a lot of people really fail to lose sight of while they're planning is, what is a lead and how are you going to track the conversion? So a lot of people will say, well, we just sent out an email and we got 3,000 opens. Let's start calling them. That's really not a lead. Now, if you did 7 emails and you were to track across all of them the individuals that engaged or opened multiple times and clicked, now you boil that list down a little bit further and maybe you get to 100 or 150. That's a little bit more reasonable. And then you can look at, are they truly a fit? Do they have the right things? And you can get very granular on how you're going to market to them. But so what is a lead and what's considered a lead? And then how are you going to track it? For instance, compiling the results across several emails, looking at your SEO, whether it's organic or keywords. You need to look at what those keywords are, how are they performing, what's the competition, and what is that going to cost you on your conversions, right? So a lot of those components give you the ability to make better decisions as your plan gets into the execution phase. So if you know how to track the elements, you'll do much better when you're implementing, and then you get to the optimized side. The big thing that I always get asked is, but what should I spend on marketing? And there's a lot of metrics out there that say, well, if your revenue is this, you should be spending 2%. Look, when you're a smaller company, 2% of sub $1 million in revenue doesn't get you very far, right? So your expectations don't get aligned. It becomes very frustrating. So your expenditures, as you're a smaller provider, are probably going to be higher. And then as you grow, they will start to level out and move more towards that 2% of whatever your revenue is. I can't give you what that magic is because it really depends upon your growth pattern, your revenues, and your profitability, right? Profitability is how you set a budget. However, there's no bad time to market. Even in a bad market is the best time to put your plan and execute it, right? Such as some of the times that we've gone through in the last couple of months, right? But what we've proven is that we are the most resilient industry out there, being in the technology delivery side. So we have a very good, people need us, they need us to run their business. So, you know, you as a provider are in a very good position, and marketing is what brings out, if we go back to that think phase, brings your brand and delivers your brand out there. But you can't do everything at once. You do have to set a budget. The second part that goes along, and I should have probably put this above the budget, is you have tool sets. Now, you have some type of CRM or PSA that you can track names and addresses and phone numbers, etc., and the ability to run through a sales cycle, right? But there's other tool sets that you need to invest in. You may need to invest in an email blast engine. You may need to invest in a license of Zoom that lets you do webinars. Keyword components of doing analysis, or you know, a variety of different things, managing social media engagement. All of these tools, some of them are free, like you can manage your up to 3 social medias, for example, inside a Hootsuite at no cost. So it gives you the ability to go in at no cost, but just like anything else, if you really want to get good reporting out of it, then they want to get you for the reporting, right? So they'll give you the free, get you in on that part to get at the second part. So look at your tool sets and analyze the tactics that you're going to use those tool sets for. Do you have an existing tool set that will do it? Some PSAs have an add-on that will allow you to do email blasts. They have pluses and minuses. So, you know, the big ones that everybody uses for email are Constant Contact or MailChimp, Campaign Director, or a couple of the name big ones. Hootsuite is a very good one to do your social, but inside the PSAs, sometimes that's built in, right? You also have to align those tool sets to say, can I manage my data in them? And some places you can, and some places you can't. So it's very important for you to look at that and analyze those tool sets, and then what are the tactics that they're going to do for you. So what do I say analyze tactics? So if you go back to where I was saying, thinking of what are my metrics, what are my goals, now you're going to start to talk about the tactics that are going to get you to those goals, and how those tool sets are going to align to those tactics to help you achieve those goals. Okay, so it's kind of the puzzle, and that maze really is not a straight line through it. There's a lot of obstacles. You can see there's some places you can get through, and there's other places that you're going to just run into a wall and have to step back and go sideways and keep pushing on the wall till the bricks fall out. After you get these upper 4 bullets that we've talked about here, you want to put together some plan of execution, right? Now, this is, it can be very elaborate, it can be very short, but you have to have a plan, and the plans look all different ways. You can do a Google on a marketing plan, and you'll get something very elaborate that will take you all kinds of different ways. You know, keep it simple, right? Especially if you're owner-led and you've got a lot of things going on. Keep it simple. Align your plan of execution in a quarterly goal. And, you know, other examples of take your quarterly goal. So security is a great topic right now. So security, and then what each month can you start with and then build on top of that? So you're building your brand, you're building your momentum, people are recognizing, and you're adding elements of marketing as we go along. And again, at the end, I give you this little component that gives you like a goal and metrics and a little bit a flavor of a plan of execution that you can splinter off and do maybe like a little playbook in there. Okay. So as we move over to implement, there we go. This is where you're going to start to execute your plan, launch, tracking, and conversion. And what I encourage everybody to do is to ensure that you have meetings just like you would anywhere else, so you can ensure that you're staying accountable to your plan. And this is where a lot of companies fall off, is they're not good at the execution of marketing, right? They know what they want to do, they'll put the budget forth, and the expectations won't be met because the execution becomes tougher when you're doing it, especially as a smaller owner-led. But as you get more mature and you have more resources available to you, you're easier to get launch, tracking, and conversion rates in there to measure them. And the reason that you're doing this is to understand what you're doing and what you're doing well and what you're not doing so well. And if you're not doing it well, is it a tactic that you should revisit in your plan, right? And that's where we'll talk about that more in Optimize. Setting up the tool sets, you know, a lot of these tool sets can be optimized and they can to implement. So after you've selected what they're going to do and how you're going to use them tactically, you got to go in and set them up. So a lot of people buy a PSA or an RMM and they rush right into business and they get going and they find out there's a lot more that they need to implement through process, or they have to reach out and get assistance to get it so they can get the tracking or conversion or launching that RMM to really do what they needed to do from an automation perspective. No different on the marketing side. You have tools, they will do things to help you, but if you don't configure them or you don't put the time in, you won't get an effective launch tracking or the ability to measure conversions. During this phase, you're going to build momentum. You're going to have setbacks, just like that maze, but that's okay. Be encouraged. Everybody has a setback in marketing. Everybody has a setback in a service event. It's no different as you go from one to the other, right? Marketing is a process, just like an operation. And once you build the momentum, it gets easier, it gets repeatable, and you become more mature in your sales and marketing as to understanding what your brand represents, what people view it as, and you'll get better insight and granularity. So just like we heard in the prior presentation on SOC and vulnerability or insight, building momentum gives you insight. And as you build momentum, energy will build within your organization because people see growth, they see change, and you know, they want to be a part of that. So, you know, it can be, building momentum is very good in the implementation side, right? Follow through. This is another very critical area. I can't stress enough. If you take the time to aggregate things over and boil a list down from emails or social media, whatever the engagement is, and you have to turn it into a sales engine or into a pipeline for conversion, right? Because sales is the one that will typically start making the phone calls through demand gen, cold calling, whatever it is, to turn it over. And so again, you need to make sure that you're implementing a process for follow-through that you can track, look at conversions, and optimize as time goes on, right? So think of that as, what are your salespeople doing for you? You know, is that CRM set up to track activity-based selling, that allows you to go from the marketing through the sale and then back into the cycle to keep the pipeline flowing, right? Because that's what marketing's job is to just create the hype and get it to your demand gen side to follow through. Okay, so optimization. You can see as the arrow is showing here, we're building momentum, we're going in. But no good plan or implementation should just run along, right? We see time and time again, we always have time for continuous improvement. So this is where you start to analyze and measure. You go back to where you originally in the think phase and the plan phase and implementation, and you say, okay, here's where, are we meeting the metric? If we are meeting the metric, can we change it by 1% or 2% and get a better result? Is there one or two little things that we can change along the way through our analysis that is still measurable, doesn't necessarily deviate from what we originally thought or planned or have implemented already, but we might be able to do one thing, tweak it a little bit, and add to it. So for instance, you're running email campaigns, they're doing well. So now maybe what you do is you go in, for an example, go into LinkedIn and get yourself subscribed to LinkedIn Sales Navigator, get your mailing list up into Sales Navigator, connect with everybody, and then don't bombard everybody with a LinkedIn email like we all get killed with these days. It's tough, right? But what I encourage everybody to do is think about setting like a $500 budget to do a LinkedIn sponsored ad to all of the people that are in your list, and additional that you may or may not know, that you can select an audience very easily through the tool and send them back to your website and all that. So how do you measure that? Well, one, we might be getting more penetration from the people that we've already marketed to, because now our brand is showing up in yet another place that they might be showing up on their LinkedIn feed, as well as others. We're driving people back to our website or to a conversion form. That lets us measure the effectivity because we can see the charts telling us that we're getting more. So then it becomes a, let's go into this again and rethink about how we're converting those leads. How are we capturing true data? Do we have the tool sets in place in our implementation to capture that data? So you can see in each one of these phases that we go through, the think, plan, implement, optimize, it goes back to a prior phase, right? Tweak your messaging and always update your assets. There's nothing wrong with ever changing your assets a little bit, tweaking them. You're going to get feedback from people that you talk to, and they're going to read your messaging and they're going to say something, and you're going to say, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Don't be offended. Take it in. You know, they're telling you because there was confusion. So if there was confusion in what they saw or what their impression was, go back and tweak that messaging and update whatever the asset is. It could be a sales sheet. It could be a PowerPoint. It could be an email. It could be something that you're putting out on social media. But look at all those assets, right? And everything in your marketing tool set, we refer to as an asset. Okay. Make database decisions and feedback. One of the biggest assets that you have is your list. And your list is the gold that is going to turn into your pipeline if you nurture it properly. So let's face it, there's a couple things that go on here, right? Everybody that I talk to, and you probably talk to your peers, will tell you that the best leads come from referrals. So as part of your think, plan, implement, referrals should be part of that nurturing process with existing clients or a referral process. But make decisions and feedback based on that, on how you get it, right? Now, those have very high conversion rates versus emailing out to a mailing list or webinars and hoping your people are going to come in and engage, right? So take that list and look at the engagements and score them. And over time, you'll find that you may have started with a list of 2,000 or 3,000. You may find out that you boil down to 200 or under that are consistently engaging with you in email through opens, links clicked. Maybe you have some web visiting software that tracks them all the way through to your website, and you can see that they engaged and moved through your website. Maybe they like things on your social media platforms, but the granularity of that is tracking that against your list gives you the ability to get more granular and then start to be very focused and go back and rethink on how do you take that subset and market to them and give them more granularity, because those are the people that are engaging with you, and those are most likely the ones that you will be able to convert as you move through your process of selling. Hopefully this is all making sense and going in. Don't ever be afraid to refresh your plan. You wrote the plan, you can change the plan. But remember what the title of this is. You know, you are coming here to succeed. You need to continue to move forward, get it done, and stop. You know, don't stop. You got to keep going. So a lot of companies will stop in between, or they will have somebody leave, or they get really busy and they don't continue to do their marketing. If you stop your marketing for 35 days or 30 days, it will take you 90 days to get close to getting your momentum back. And some of the people that were engaging with you may fall off because they don't understand why you fell off. So consistency is more than just making your brand consistent. It's also deliberate consistency for execution, right? And we talked about execution earlier. So again, brand consistency. You will see our logos in the different things for our products and our marketing. These are trademarked logos, and we make sure that when we do different things, we brand them, you see them, and just about anywhere you go that we are or anything we do, you'll know our little guy. Our little guy is trademarked with the Patent and Trademark Office of the United States, and he's called the Balancer, and we own him and everything that's there, but he's recognizable. He's been in our brand since day one, which is over 12 years. So same thing. A lot of you guys have been in business for a long time. Some of you say, when I talk with people, they say, oh, well, we got to change our brand. No, you don't have to change your brand. You can do some tweaks to your brand, but you have to be consistent. So what does that mean? Your social media headers and profile pictures should all be the same. They should look the same and represent the same thing that your website does, right? Because those are all customer facing. So if people go and get different messages, your brand is confusing. If they get the same message, you look sharp, you look professional, you look like you've got something. So part of marketing also is to make ourselves look bigger than we might be, so we can attract some more of the upstream type prospects that we would like to have. So brand consistency is a very critical component, and will keep you moving along. All right, and stay committed to the path. I can't tell you more than anything. So many businesses start, not just in the technology sector. They start, they get frustrated within 90 days because they're not seeing a return on investment. Look, the expectation you have to have is you need a plan that's going to take 6 months to kick in and really build momentum. Right around month 3 or 4, you're going to start to see some trickling coming in, and it gets frustrating because you're saying you're spending money, what am I getting, and things of that nature, whether it's internal or external. But it will pay off if you stay committed to the path and you take these steps that I've kind of pointed out today in these areas. Okay, so I think, Steve, we can open it up to Q&A. I'm going to throw these links up here real quick with my contact information. You guys can, the sample marketing plan is that 2-3 page that gives you the ability to put some measurements on paper in front of you, or at least get you leapfrogged and started into a thought process. And the employee advocacy for media growth is steps you can take internally to help grow your social media base and get engagement on social media. Okay, so download those. Those are some great pieces that we have. And Steve, go ahead, fire away with any questions.
Thanks, Pete. For those of you that are still online with us, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. Feel free to click on that and type in any questions for Pete, but I already have a few to get us started. You know, Pete, as I was listening to you, and you and I have done a few things together over the last 6 months or so, I find that setting expectations in the beginning, if I look at the people that are attending this, the ones I know, most of them are small enough that the owner is probably the salesperson. And in that light, they've probably mostly just responded to referrals, and they've told anyone that would listen that they're fantastic salespeople because their close ratio is close to 100% on the referrals they get. And then they move into marketing and they get frustrated quickly. How do we set some kind of proper expectations for people to measure marketing rather than measuring sales, right? The difference between lead count and actual closure.
Sure. So that's a combination of sales and marketing and understanding a funnel. But, you know, realistic expectations, like I said, of how long it's going to take you and getting committed to the path and making sure that you're truly committed and you can stomach that. Is one thing, but we have a way of, you know, we look at referrals, and I think it's probably, if I were to talk to anybody that's on this call, they would tell you that their close rate is probably 75% or greater, right? That's a pretty high close rate, and not just close rate, but it's also a very high percentage for conversion. When you're getting out to, so we categorize things from an A, B, C, D, right? A are the people that are talking to you, they're converting, they're going to ask you for a proposal, etc. A B, you're still getting to that point. C, they're starting to get comfortable from you. They might want to try you out, but they're doing it. And D are just people that have no clue and they're not doing it, right? And so when you build your list, you want to look at that list the first time when you start using it and say, everybody's a D. Nobody knows us. We can't get there. What's it going to take from an A to a C to a B, and then obviously a B to an A? So what we tell everybody from an example perspective is, in your pipeline, for every 25 that you put in as a prospect, you're going to get 10% out. So that can tell you how robust your engine needs to be to fill the top. If you have 5 stages in your pipeline for sales, so for every 100, you're going to get 5 out, right? It doesn't seem like a large percentage, but when you look at it, that's more of a realistic expectation.
Cool, thank you. You know, along those lines, someone's asking this question, and we debate this one all the time now, but what are the average amount of touches needed before someone will raise their hand and take action?
That's a great question. And I don't know, did I lose control, Steve, that we could go back just to make sure everybody downloaded that wanted to? Yeah, okay.
That's fine.
So the number of touches has gone up over time, and I don't even know what the number is now that we're in this kind of mix of COVID, kind of coming out of COVID, going back into COVID, working home. People are at their desk, they're not at their desk. But before that, the average was about 22 touches. Now, if you think about that, that's a lot. But if you put in a good plan, you can get 22 touches in about 3 to 3.5 months. So it can be pretty good. So
thus the reality of how long this process takes, right?
Yep.
When we really talk about marketing, and so often, as I talk to people in peer group, we hear people say, well, I tried something, I stopped. I tried something else, I stopped. I tried something else. Marketing just doesn't work for us. And I listen and I want to say, we have a problem with expectations more than we do with marketing. And we have to be fair. The budget for marketing for most people, probably most people on this call, is zero. So how do they figure out how to get to, and I love what you said earlier, that the smaller the company, the higher percentage you need to spend of your revenue, not the lower, just because you can't move the needle on a couple $100s a month, right?
Yeah, the analogy on that, Steve, is think about somebody that's going from break fix to MSP. They have no idea of why would I pay you to go to a monthly cost when I can just call you when I need you, right? That old persona of doing it. It's the same thing. If I only spend a little bit or I get some from my vendors here and there, how do I justify or how do I look at that cost realistically? It can be a tough decision.
I'm going to put you on the spot with this one, Pete. So I appreciate that you put the sample marketing plan out there and people are going to have something tangible they can take with them. I want to see if we can give them one more, or at least give them an example to help them with one more. I think the hardest thing that everyone on this call has to do is to figure out how their core offering differentiates them from everyone else, right? They're all MSPs. We all have monitoring services. We all do a lot of the same things. Do you, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, so if you can't, just say so. Do you have an example you could give of how somebody you've been working with has really differentiated themselves in the market? Sorry, I told you I was putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a bunch of different customers that have done different things to differentiate themselves, but I can't think of anyone that encompasses everything. That is on the spot, Steve. Thanks a lot.
I know. I thought of it while you were speaking. I couldn't give you the heads up. So, but I think that really goes to the crux of the struggle that our audience has, right? Struggle number one is budget and expectation. They have no budget, and their expectation is, I'll start this now, because we need some sales like this month, right? So they'll start that. That's one struggle. But I really think the big struggle is finding the wording or the plan or the image to actually differentiate from others. Listen, I think a lot of people on this call probably can't differentiate what their core offering is, let alone how to publicly talk about it. So that's what I'm looking for, and I'd love to try and give one example if we can from this audience. I can help you, Pete, and I'll give one. And it was timely to what went on. When work from home became the big rush 4 months ago, and everyone was rushing, we had a colleague of ours, not even a peer group member, a colleague of ours, set up a phone number, a hotline, that he broadcast everywhere he could in Southern Florida to say, need help with your work from home configuration? Here, call this hotline. We'll be happy to help you. And he just set that up as a differentiator, if you will, to try and help the audience. Now, it didn't really talk about what his core offering was or anything else. He just said, we're an IT company. We're going to try and put something out there.
Yeah. We had a customer that did something similar up in Ohio. As I continue to think through it, and they changed the tone of everything. They rethought everything. They went back into their social media and they basically reached out and said, hey, we don't care who you work with right now. You may need additional help and we're here to help you. So,
yep.
And they reached out to other partners that they knew were also a little smaller and might need the bandwidth that they had available. So they partnered up with a couple others in there, and it worked out very well for them. They actually got some net new business during COVID, but at the same time, they became a real good what's the word I'm looking for, but not just a benefactor, but they gave back to the community that they were working in. So
Let's see if we can-
corporate responsibility, you know, is big.
Let's see if we can touch on one more question. It's ironic that this person is asking another question about how many touches, given how many times he and I have connected about him joining a peer group, and I still haven't gotten there. But my good friend Nate Archer is asking this question, so I'll call him out. And he said, what's the ideal marketing mix that you would recommend for a small MSP, and how many touches within that mix?
Well, Nate, if we were to say 7 to 22, or if we were to say 22 mixes, I would probably tell you that you're going to mix in over a 45-day period social media at 2 to 3 times per week on each one of your media platforms, and you're probably going to send an email with a phone call follow-up every 10 to 14 business days.
That's good info. That I like that. I have to obviously reach out to Nate more often than I have been. As far as that, you know, you said earlier, no bad time to market, especially now. And I think that's the big message we should be ending with, right? Is yes, it's appropriate to market. Yes, we should be marketing. Yes, we need to get our names out there and keep them out there. Any advice to those that are doing little to nothing right now? How do they start?
If you're doing little to nothing, you know, the way to start, the easiest way to start is really sit down and take this slide deck when you receive it, or go back and view the recording, but go back and look at that think. You know, so many companies fail because they don't understand their product and how to market it, right? Sell to your strength, not to your weakness, right? So take the time to build out. It doesn't really cost you anything other than your time. And that's where you have to start. Because once you start there, it will give you the opportunity to push through into all the other parts very quickly. You know, certainly if there's an execution thing that you want to start just to get your brand out there, social media is a great way to start. Throwing out the example like I did also with a little advertisement on LinkedIn or something.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Hopefully the information you received was actionable and helpful. For those not already participating in one of our peer groups, please reach out to us so that we can discuss the value along with our money back guarantee. I want to thank Pete and Billy for their time and expertise. And I promise you, because someone put this question, that they've attended nothing but webinars the last few weeks and they've received no slideshows. It's no decks from anybody, which goes to that follow-up piece or the follow-through piece, Pete, that you mentioned earlier. I promise you we will follow through. You will receive the slide deck. You will receive a link to our YouTube channel. You can actually go there now. Just look up MSP-Ignite on YouTube, and you can find our channel, and all our webinars are recorded and up there for you to view. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you again for attending.